This plane might look ordinary, but it's not. It's a lucky plane. It's the one that carried Bruce, the pilot, and 2 other passengers through the Bermuda Triangle and lived to tell the tale. This is what they found out. The flight that almost took the life of Bruce was first immortalized in a book called Without a Trace, published in 1977. It was written by Charles Berlitz, who previously wrote a bestseller called The Bermuda Triangle. This was that book sequel, and the story talked about the dangers and mysteries of flying through the Bermuda Triangle. Somehow, probably because it was just one of the many stories in the book, the death-defying adventure of a young pilot and a small plane that took off on the beast known as the Bermuda Triangle got lost in time. Very few people had read it until at the end of the old millennium, the internet was just becoming alive. In 1999, a website called BermudaTriangle.org published the story as a separate website, and it became #1 on the search engine rankings in its first week. Even though it was almost 30 years after Bruce flew from Andros to Miami, the world had finally seen the unprecedented story of how a man and a small plane managed to survive the incident. Since that faithful web article, Bruce has even written a book on this phenomenon titled Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. But what happened on this journey that's so noteworthy? Well, I want to tell you about that. Join us on a mind journey. Imagine it's around 3 p.m. on December 4th, 1970. We're at a small airport on Andros Island in the Bahamas. A 20-year-old Bruce is getting his brand new, almost glistening Beechcraft Bonanza A36 ready for takeoff. But look, Bruce is not alone. He has 2 other men beside him. Bruce is the pilot, sitting next to him is his father, and in the back is a guy called Chuck Lafayette. He's their business associate. What kind of business? Well, Bruce and his dad had a small real estate brokerage in South Florida. He'd been flying since 1967, and in those 3 years of flying, he knew the trip like the back of his hand. Even though he was young, he was still an experienced pilot with 600 hours of flight time under his belt. The plane took off a few minutes after takeoff. Bruce noticed something strange. There was an unusual-looking cloud, the shape of a lentil, 500 feet above the ocean. The Miami Flight Service informed them over the VHF radio that the weather was good, so they didn't pay much attention to it. The strange thing about this cloud was that it didn't usually appear so low over the ocean. He started climbing at a rate of 1,000 feet per minute, and the cloud began shifting. It changed its shape and became a cumulus cloud that engulfed the entire plane. It was climbing and growing at the same rate as the Bonanza was climbing into the air. For about 10 minutes, they struggled to get out from this grayish cloud. But at 11,500 feet, they burst through the cumulus cloud and saw the clear blue sky. Immediately after, the plane smashed that like button, just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, the plane leveled off, and Bruce accelerated to 195 miles per hour, the aircraft's maximum speed. As the plane was distancing itself from the cloud, the pilot looked back. He saw the cloud in the form of a semicircle, something similar to Pac-Man ready to eat up the plane again. After a few minutes of flight, Bruce lost sight of the 20-mile-wide cloud, and now it was smooth flying to Miami, or so he thought. A few minutes after seeing the clear skies, they all noticed a giant dark cloud forming right before their eyes. It happened when they were flying over Bimini Islands. The cloud looked similar to the one they just escaped from, but this one was bigger, much bigger. According to Bruce, its top was 60,000 feet high. It was so vast that it seemed the cloud and the earth were one. They had no option but to go through it. As soon as they entered this cloud, they saw a strange phenomenon. First of all, even though the cloud was dark and there was only 5 miles of visibility, strangely, there was no rain. But that's not all. All of a sudden, the entire cloud was lit up by a white light. It wasn't lightning, it was something else. These bright white flashes kept appearing and disappearing in a matter of seconds. The deeper the plane delved into the cloud, the stronger and more intense these white flashes became. Bruce felt like they were headed for disaster, so he had to do something. They made a left turn, 135 degrees, hoping to get out of the cloud and fly around it. They were flying for 27 minutes. After 6 or 7 miles of flying, they realized the cloud just continued in a near-perfect curve, and it just kept growing around them. It took 2 more minutes of mindless flying to realize that the cloud of Andros and the cloud of Bimini were actually 2 opposite sides of the cloud they thought they'd just passed. They were still inside Pac-Man's mouth. The inexplicable had just happened. The Andros cloud rapidly spread outward and stretched for over 30 miles. At this point, Bruce, his father, and the business associate were all trapped inside a billowing prison. There was no escape. They flew hopelessly for about 13 miles, then they noticed an opening. Could it be? Was this the end of their cloudy prison? Bruce immediately chased after it. As soon as they started approaching the upper ends of the U-shaped tunnel had joined, now the opening had a perfectly circular shape. It was about 1 mile in width and about 10 miles long. At the other end, the clear blue sky that would hopefully lead them to Miami. But something changed. That 1 mile wide hole was now narrowing. It was only about 200 feet in width. But strangely enough, as they approached it, it became apparent that the hole was only a mile long, not 10 like they previously thought. Bruce increased the engine's RPM, and the speed gauge was now reading 230 miles per hour. They saw the blue skies and the light coming from them. The walls of the tunnel were illuminated by the sun. However, these perfectly round walls started to shrink. Luckily, the plane was fast enough, it broke through. It was now out of the tunnel. After flying through it for about 20 seconds, Bruce was overcome with a feeling of weightlessness as the plane emerged from the other end. They were finally free, until the electronic and magnetic instruments began malfunctioning. They were out of the tunnel, but they still couldn't see the sky, they couldn't see the ocean, they couldn't see anything except a grayish fog all around them that made the compass flicker and the needle turn mindlessly. Luckily, Bruce was able to contact Miami. During the call, he told them that the aircraft was around 45 miles southeast of Bimini at an altitude of about 10,500 feet, 3,200 meters. What did they say? They replied that the plane was nowhere to be found on radar. Something was clearly wrong. But what Bruce knew was that something was off inside this grayish-white haze. They had 2-mile visibility, and yet they saw no ocean, they saw no sky. But there was neither lightning nor rain. And yet, the gauges and the controls were all flickering uncontrollably. Bruce named this the electronic fog because it was messing with the instruments on board the plane. All hope was lost again for about 3 minutes. Then the radio came on, and the controller told them that they had just identified an aircraft flying over Miami Beach. But wait a second, they were flying for 34 minutes. How could they find themselves over the skies of Miami? If anything, they should have been approaching the Bimini Islands. But then the electronic fog started lifting. These giant 5-mile-long splits appeared into the sky, and for the first time, they actually saw the sea. In 8 seconds, everything had disappeared, the sun was shining. And as Bruce's pupils were adjusting to the brightness, he saw Miami Beach right below the Beechcraft Bonanza. They landed in Palm Beach, and they realized that they were flying for less than 47 minutes. The time read 3:48 p.m. Now here's a $1 million question. How could a plane flying 200 miles per hour reach Miami in 47 minutes, which is 250 miles away? Usually, it took the plane about 75 minutes to fly from Andros to Miami, and we're talking about a direct route here. The pilot, his dad, and Lafayette were all perplexed. They measured the fuel, and it was only half of what the plane usually consumed during such a flight. They didn't talk about this incident for a long time. And then Bruce heard people talking about the Bermuda Triangle disappearances. How about 200 aircraft and 2,000 ships had disappeared in the region known as the Bermuda Triangle? After a little digging around, Bruce found something remarkable. You see, he found out that the Bermuda Triangle was a possible time warp. Time moved differently over the region. The 1-mile tunnel they just passed was actually 10 miles long. The difference, time seemed to go faster here. That probably explains how they covered 100 miles, 160 kilometers, in just 4 minutes. The laws of physics didn't apply to the Bermuda Triangle. The electronic fog had a mind of its own. Bye for now.